Hey, Ceryba here. Today's video will be on the tallest and most majestic character in the game, and I was not paid at all by Cerydra to say that. Cerydra is our newest Harmony unit and brings a really cool mechanic, albeit a niche one. So we'll check out her kit, how it works, how good her eidolons are, and then all my findings for her best build, icon calculations, and more like who she works best with. Like and sub if this video helps you out, let me know if you're pulling, and let's begin. So she is a Wind Harmony, our second of this combo, and is focused on hypercarries. Among base stats, she has a nice amount of attack, which is good for her kit's buffs. As for the trace leveling priority, you should invest into her talent and skill before anything else, and then you can level her ult for some damage, but not really that much. But now let's check out her abilities. Her skill first will apply military merit to an ally, which is a permanent buff, so no uptime issues on this. Military merit is a buff defined in the talent, so let's quickly check that out. The ally that has military merit will get an attack buff based on Cerydra's attack stat, 24% at level 10. If she, for example, has 4000 attack, that's a flat 960 attack for your ally. What will also happen is when the ally attacks, Ceridra will do some additional damage based on her stats. It isn't that much though, and caps at 20 times, but this can be reset when she ults. Now the major thing that Ceridra does is based on military merit and this charge system that she has. Ceridra will have a charge system up to 8 points. When at 6 points, the ally with military merit will have the buff upgraded to peerage, whilst also removing their CC effects. Military merit's attack buff is still there, same with the additional damage from Ceridra, but then you also get the peerage buff. Peerage will give 72% crit damage specifically for skill damage, then 10% all-type res pen, and it will also let you trigger Coup de main when using your skill. After this all triggers, it will revert peerage to military merit and use up those 6 charge points. Now what Coup de main does is copy and use the ability about to be used, so the skill you were just about to use, and then use the original ability after. Now the copied ability does not completely copy the ability, for example when consuming resources. For example, the Herta's inspiration is not consumed when Ceridra activates Coup de main, letting us get 2 enhanced skills back to back. More on if this is any good later. Same with Phainon. He doesn't consume 4 Scourge stacks, but still gets the max power ability as if it did consume 4 Scourge. However, in the case of someone like Hook, she specifically makes her next skill enhanced. We don't have a resource, and so we can't double enhanced skill because the original skill will just be a normal one. I hope that makes sense. So, synergies will be kind of specific. But how do we get charge points? First, when Ceridra uses her skill, she will gain 1 point of charge, no matter if you keep using it, even if the merit buff doesn't need to be reapplied. Secondly, in the talent. If the ally with military merit uses specifically a basic or a skill, Ceridra will gain 1 charge. So basic or skill can stack up the charges, but an attacking skill specifically is duplicated, letting you delay the coup de main if necessary with basic attacks. And third, we have her ultimate. Ceridra will hit all enemies and gain 2 charge, greatly helping to get that double skill. Since it can be used off turn, this ult can be used to force the peerage state for an optimal moment. Since copying a skill early on isn't a great idea if it won't be buffed by your other allies, like Sunday for example. And in Phainon's case, we probably want a double Kazalana Meteor, not a double normal Phainon skill. The final way of getting charge is a one-time thing. In her A4, the character with military merit can generate 1 charge point for Ceridra after they use their ultimate. Again, this is once a battle, but it's nice for the first rotation to start popping off. Now, finally for her abilities, we have her technique. It is pretty cool as she will gain military merit, but it will swap around to whichever character's out on the field. Then, when entering battle, Ceridra will automatically use skill once for free on the ally that enters battle. So it kinda screws up some attacking techniques on supports, but otherwise it's a guaranteed skill usage on your DPS for 1 instant charge, the buff uptime, and some more benefits from her traces, all without consuming SP. And so there, for her passives. In her A2 we get a buff to Ceridra's damage output. For every 100 of her attack exceeding 2000, she will get a crit damage buff up to 360%. So at 4000 attack you'll cap this out, and it's a whole ton of free stats. Her A4 will then give her 100% free crit rate. And that's on everything, unlike Bronya where it's limited to basic attacks. So now, all she needs to do is stack attack for her buff, but also for her self-crit damage buff. It will let her do some damage, but it really isn't that much even with all these buffs compared to a unit like Tribi. And finally, A6 will give 20 speed to herself and the teammate with military merit. So luckily we have another benefit to the buff. This will last 3 turns though, unlike the permanent merit buff, so you will need to skill often to keep it up. But since you can apply this automatically at the start of the combat, you can now reduce your DPS's speed needs by 20, allowing for attack boots to run ahead of -1 advanced comps. Or you can keep the same setup but go a bit higher and hit the 160 speed breakpoint. Though it is slightly annoying that her technique is necessary for this on wave 1, as some content does not allow you to use technique. The next part of her E6 will generate 5 energy for Cerydra when the merit ally uses basic or skill, and since she'll be giving them more skills through her ult, it creates a nice feedback loop. In trace bonuses, she then gets wind damage, attack percent, and some HP. Cool. Now let's quickly check out her eidolons and then move on to the good stuff. Her E1 first gives 16% def ignore to the military merit ally, so kinda like E1 Sunday. But then if the ally is in the privilege state, it goes up to 36% for the skill damage. Not bad. Then if Cerydra uses her skill, you will regen 2 energy for the target. Now, whilst the def ignore is not bad, this energy in the E1 is irrelevant for any character not named Phainon, as 2 energy does nearly nothing for DPS usually, but for Phainon specifically, it will let every Cerydra skill now give 2 core flame to him rather than 1, an immense rotation buff for Phainon teams. Her E2 will then give a 40% damage buff to the merit ally whilst also increasing her own damage by 160%, but since her damage isn't that substantial, you're mostly looking at the allied damage buff, which isn't too high. E4 is then whatever, it's just a buff to her ultimate's damage multiplier. And finally, E6 gives 20% res pen to the merit ally at all times, and it also increases her own res pen. And then it will buff Cerydra's additional damage multiplier by 300%, so now she can start pumping out damage. Here are my Eidolon calculations for Cerydra with Phainon. And E1 I calculated with just a def ignore, but then one variant E1 where I replaced Bronya for a better support. This is because with E1 Cerydra spamming out core flames, you can now run Sunday Cerydra and a powerful, undiluted buffer like Tribi or Cypher that cannot stack core flames. Remember, if not using Phainon, this E1 is not going to be as crazy and is not a massive upgrade. And overall, Cerydra's personal damage does go up a lot with the Eidolons, but in a hypercarry comp, you've also got to remember the carry is doing so much, so the overall team damage increase isn't that significant. Okay, build time. You can run Sakados, Eagle, and 2-piece combinations on Cerydra. Sakados you'd want to run on a Phainon team since he will snapshot the buffs. Otherwise, in any other team, you're not going to and don't want to spam skill on Cerydra, so her uptime will be pretty weak. Since it's better than nothing, either one stack here and there is okay, so you can still run it outside of Phainon teams. But otherwise, you can run 2-piece speed and attack combos to hit speed breakpoints and give a tiny bit more attack from her scaling buff. And finally, Eagle Set is an option for more Cerydra actions and thus more energy and ults during a fight, potentially giving an extra coup de main in the long run. It's not necessary though, and she doesn't ult that frequently. For planers, I recommend Lu Shaka, but Penacony works too with Anaxa. Both will buff the carry's damage whilst giving her some energy regen. Other buffing planers work fine though. For your main stats, you will want an attack chest, speed boots, attack orb, and an energy rope. Attack boots and attack rope are also possible for a Phainon team, but only if you are finishing in one ult. Otherwise, the speed boots and energy rope can help out a ton for the second Phainon ult rotation. In non-Phainon teams, go speed and energy. You want to act more often than your team core, especially with an advancer, so you can weave in more basics in between your skill usage for the speed buff uptime. And if you are going sustainless, a HP main stat on the chest or orb is also okay, but you can also get a ton of defensive stats from substats since she doesn't need many things. So for a stat goal, you can aim for 140 speed, 4000 plus attack in combat, and then a bunch of HP and defense. There's not much else to do on her. Crit damage won't change much since she gives herself a ton already and doesn't contribute a whole ton of damage. Now, for her Lycones. Epoch etched in Golden Blood first has a lovely base attack to help her military merits attack scaling buff. Then a whopping 64% attack buff in the Lycone itself. Then 1 SP if using the ult to attack, and then you give a 54% skill damage buff to an ally character if scaling specifically one target. It is a very specific Lycone and a noticeable buff for Cerydra teams because half of her buffs don't have permanent uptime. But because Cerydra is niche already, and this Lycone realistically is only good for her, you don't need it. The SP can be really nice though, as always with these type of cones, but test your team first to see if you have SP issues. Now, she did get a free-to-play code in this patch, so not pulling her signature is less of an issue. You'll get a 32% attack buff and then a stacking 16% attack every skill up to 3 times, for a grand total of 80% attack. It's just a big old stat stick, and it's also okay on Robin if your energy needs are satisfied or you don't have team-wide buff cones. Speaking of Robin, Cerydra can also steal her fellow attack scaling Harmony's cone and run Flowing Nightglow as a perfectly fine option. It provides buffs, a ton of attack for Cerydra, and even some energy, so if you're not using it on Robin, she can yoink it. So with the build out of the way, what are my thoughts on Cerydra? Well, I think duplicating a skill is such a cool kit mechanic, and it could see some seriously crazy interactions in the future. Duplicating skills can be really strong in some cases. What duplicating skills does is front load a whole ton of damage. A whole extra skill is a damage buff in its own way, as it will be duplicating the multiplier itself. And on a high self buff unit like Phainon, getting more super saturated buffs like attack and damage and crit damage is nowhere near as valuable compared to getting raw multipliers that you wouldn't normally get. It also means a whole extra attack, which is going to mean you can hit more enemies in the case of Pure Fiction. It means you can do more toughness damage in the case of Apocalyptic Shadow. And in MOC and wave-based modes, you can duplicate the skill and have it carry over to the start of the next wave if you kill on the first part. Finally, this extra skill happens without SP usage, without needing an advance, an extra turn, and it means you won't have to deal with buff timings falling off next action. It does take a while to ramp up though, and a turn from an action advancer works in a similar and easier way with better frequency. You will have to use more SP on the advancer comp, but you can also just use the combo every team rotation rather than every 6 Cerydra charges. Half of her buffs also have bad uptime as they are tied to the big burst turn, so without it, you're getting a bunch of attack and some speed for most of the DPS actions, which is not that much. So although an extra skill sounds nice, the frequency she gives them is not enough to make her a universal beast, and her kit is very specific. So because her kit is tied to specifically attack crit type carries that have an insane skill reliance or use skill a lot, she only really has 2 core synergies, Phainon and Anaxa. She can also work alright with Archer in a sustainers comp, but in a sustained comp you wouldn't replace a Cypher for her as a second buffer in my opinion. Now, being best in slot as a second buffer for 2 of the best DPS in the game, and being okay for another top tier is still decent, and it allows for more universal buffers to go elsewhere as she will be tied to these units. Not to mention, she is a noticeable upgrade for her 2 core synergies at equal investment to other supports. But for people without these first 2 DPS, especially if you don't have Phainon, you can safely skip her. A universal harmony is more important for most players. But onto Phainon. Phainon can get Core Flame from her skill. She has an E1 designed literally for him, and the duplication on his Full Scourge is just insane for damage. The buffs she gives to said skill are massive, and since it is his highest burst ability by far, we don't even mind that the buffs are this infrequent. The speed buff also allows him to now just always run attack boots and still go ahead of the advances, which is real nice. Cerydra is the Jiansho to Phainon's Acheron, the highest to his Castris, and she will be a very relevant pool for Phainon players going forward. But unlike Acheron and Jiansho's release, Phainon has a ton of really good supports already, so it doesn't feel as necessary. I still think you want to pull her if you are rocking the E0 Phainon, and she is still a great upgrade for E2 Phainon. But since he nukes everything right now easily at E2, you are fine with waiting for a rerun to see how he fares. Anaxa now with a really cool interaction. He already duplicates his skill when attacking enemies with qualitative disclosure, and so Coup de main will duplicate his skill, use his original skill, and then his talent will activate 2 more skills. That's a very cheeky 1400% attack multiplier, a whole ton of toughness damage, energy gain for Anaxa, and kills for Pure Fiction. He's just missing something to help his talent uptime in Pure Fiction to become insane there too. And because he is spamming skill and or basics twice a turn, and runs with Bronya all Sunday, the Cerydra charges up a whole ton to let him do it all again. Just remember that the speed buff will tick down very quickly with an advancer, and so the SP can sometimes be an issue if you want high uptime on this on Anaxa. If you aren't using the speed, then no biggie. It's not a Phainon tier synergy, and Robin still works great in this slot, but she is awesome for him if you want a buff to his team or don't have Robin. And then Archer is interesting because he can spam attacking skills on his turn, which builds up her charge really fast. Cerydra can be fully SP positive if you don't cover the speed, which you don't at least on Archer. So you can generate 1 a turn, and then an extra skill from Archer technically counts as 2 SP generated, pairing that with her S1 and it's a whole lot of SP. But her buffs are just pretty weak outside of that big burst turn, whereas a unit like Cypher is buffing every single shot the whole fight, as well as accumulating damage for her ult as a permanent pseudo-amplification effect. But we also do have the Herta, who is reliant on her enhanced skill. The Herta would be pretty viable if she didn't have the issue of interpretation being consumed during her enhanced skill. Now this is mitigated at E1, and E2 also lets her double her advance forward for some insane burst rotations. But you still won't max out interpretation, especially at E2 with the advance, and so you won't get the full 42 stack buffs and damage. The E1 plus the Herta can use Ceryba better than at E0, but it's not perfect either. And since some people might mention it, I'll talk about Zila. Zila can spam out skills and basics with Resurgence giving her more actions, meaning a bunch of coup de main. But her extra skill will go on a random target, and she does a bunch of ult-based damage, not always skill, so it's a bit clunky. As for other DPS, no one really works too well, as you want to first be very reliant on skill-based damage, but also either have an insane burst skill like Phainon, or a high amount of skill spam potential like Anaxa. And even if she works with another DPS, it's likely not worth the pause, as it will end up being a side grade or maybe even a downgrade. I'm sure there will be cool combos like Crit Linkshot or something, and future characters might be built with her in mind, but right now it's a Phainon mostly pull. Here's hoping she gets more love. Anyways, let me know what you think of Cerydra, and thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my cool YouTube members, and have a Guoba day.